The room buzzed with the usual political tension, cameras rolling, lights hot, and a dozen egos quietly simmering beneath practiced smiles. Then Bill Clinton leaned forward, eyes narrowing with the same charm that once captivated the nation, but now tinged with something colder. "Well," he said, smoothing his tie, "you're not exactly a legal scholar." A ripple of chuckles danced across the room. Polished shoes shuffled under tables. Someone in the back coughed to hide a grin. Repussy Jasmine Crockett didn't flinch. She sat still, unmoved, her eyes locked on him. Calm, steady, waiting. Clinton went on. "I mean, I admire your passion. I really do. But this isn't a courtroom, and shouting about injustice doesn't make you an expert in the law. It takes more than slogans and hashtags to understand policy." Another chuckle. This one sharper. The moderator shifted in their seat. A producer somewhere behind the scenes waved frantically, sensing the tension spike. But Clinton was already in the rhythm now, the well-worn cadence of authority cloaked in civility. "I just think if you're going to take the mantle of leadership," he added, pausing for gravity, "you ought to know what you're talking about." Then silence. And all eyes turned. Jasmine slowly leaned forward, folding her hands in front of her. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't angry. She was something far more dangerous. Ready, you could feel it in the air. Like the moment before lightning hits. But she didn't speak. Not yet, because in that pause, something shifted. The laughter faded, the smirks melted, and for the first time Clinton looked unsure. What Jasmine Crockett said next didn't just clap back, it broke the room open. But before we rewind the clock to how this even happened, to the tension, the history, and the silent battles that led to this moment, we need to understand what made it inevitable. It didn't start in that room. It started long before. For years, the Democratic Party had been walking a tightrope, balancing legacy, names, and safe centrism with the rising wave of unfiltered grassroots power. Behind closed doors, the tension had been growing louder, thicker, harder to ignore, and nowhere was that divide more vivid than between the polished legacy of the Clinton era and the unapologetic fire of voices like Jasmine Crockett. He was the master of triangulation. Bill Clinton, the man who could make a room swoon while gutting welfare, the man who sold tough on crime with a saxophone smile. For decades, his word had been gospel, his political instincts unquestioned. But the country had changed, and the party was fracturing beneath the surface. Enter Jasmine Crockett. She wasn't groomed in ivory towers or propped up by think tanks. She came from the courtroom trenches, fighting for the wrongly accused, speaking truth with a sharp tongue and sharper intellect. She didn't wear her resume like armor. She was the resume, and that terrified them. Because Crockett didn't play the game. She didn't soften her words for donors. She didn't package her anger into palatable sound bites. She didn't perform gratitude for the table scraps handed down by party elders. She was loud when silence was expected. She was black and brilliant in rooms built to be polite and forgettable. So when the invitation came for her to join the televised policy forum, the one Clinton was headlining, some wondered if it was a trap. They framed it as a dialogue, a generational exchange. But behind the scenes, insiders whispered, "She's too raw. She needs to learn respect. She should be careful how she talks around the president." Respect. It always came back to that, respectability politics. The old dance of being just angry enough to seem authentic, but never angry enough to threaten the room. Never loud enough to make donors uncomfortable. Never so real that it broke the illusion. Crockett didn't do illusions. And Clinton? Clinton believed the game was still his. So when he sat across from her that night, with his years of experience, with his condescending grin, with the crowd already on his side, he didn't realize he was playing the wrong game. Because Jasmine hadn't come to entertain. She had come prepared, and this wasn't just a comment. It was the boiling point of years of quiet tension, snapped in half on live television. Crockett didn't need a mic to command a room. She was the moment, and Clinton was about to find out what it felt like to go viral for all the wrong reasons. But before her clapback lit the internet on fire, the former president still thought he was holding the power. What happened next proved just how wrong he was. Bill Clinton didn't rise to power by accident. He was a political animal, fluent in charm, lethal in strategy. His voice could sell hope in one breath and austerity in the next. He made moderation sound like revolution and convinced millions that compromise was courage. To many, he was the comeback kid, the saxophone-playing Southerner who beat the odds, captured the White House, and led Democrats out of the wilderness. He smiled like your favorite uncle, spoke like a preacher with a Harvard ghostwriter. But beneath the polish was calculation. The kind that rewrote the rules, rebranded conservatism as bipartisanship, and traded justice for votes in swing states. The crime bill. He called it tough but smart, a sweeping package of mandatory minimums, expanded policing, and prison incentives. It crushed communities of color, particularly black families, and lit the fuse on mass incarceration. But it polled well. It made him look strong. Welfare, reform. He stood on the lawn and proudly declared the end of welfare as we know it. The cameras rolled. The headlines cheered. Behind the curtain, millions of poor families were pushed off assistance and into deeper cycles of poverty. Clinton sold those moves as pragmatism, survival, a strategy to keep Democrats relevant in a Republican decade. And maybe that was true. But for millions, it wasn't strategy. It was betrayal. And yet even with the damage laid bare, Clinton's brand never truly faded. He remained the gold standard for centrist Democrats, smooth, unshakable, forever electable. When he walked into a room, the applause still came easy. His contradictions were grandfathered in. The party moved on but never left him behind, so when Clinton took that seat across from Jasmine Crockett, he didn't see her as an equal. Not really. To him, she was part of a noisy trend. Younger, louder, angrier. The kind of Democrat who made donors nervous and cable news segments messy. He knew how to deal with people like her. Smile, compliment, belittle, dismiss. All under the velvet glove of statesmanship. So when he made the dig about her legal background, questioning her depth, her credibility, her belonging, he thought it was a clever jab, the kind that would get a chuckle, maybe a nod from the moderators. Just enough to put her back in her place without looking like a bully. He wasn't trying to destroy her, just diminish her. And that was the playbook. Clinton had always thrived. On contrast, positioning himself as the adult in the room, the steady hand in a sea of chaos. Against Crockett's unapologetic fire, he expected to come off as the wise voice of reason. What he didn't expect was resistance, real resistance. The kind that doesn't flinch, doesn't flounder, doesn't dance around power, but stares it down. Clinton had spent decades mastering the art of political survival. But survival is not the same as relevance, and relevance is something he was starting to lose. His talking points began to feel dated, his humor out of step, his critiques more bitter than insightful. He was no longer the future, just a relic of compromises past, and for many watching, especially black voters, especially women, especially younger progressives, Clinton didn't represent wisdom anymore. He represented the voice that told them to wait their turn, to tone it down, to be grateful. But what Clinton didn't count on was who Jasmine Crockett really is, and what made her immune to his games, long before the lights, long before the headlines, before the congressional badge or the trending hashtags. Jasmine Crockett was just a young black woman walking into a Texas courtroom, carrying nothing but her law degree, her backbone, and a fire that wouldn't quit. She didn't come from money, didn't have a famous last name, no legacy behind her, just legacy ahead. Her first client? A young man, barely 20, accused of stealing less than $50 worth of food. No priors. No one in the courtroom seemed to care. Except her. The prosecutor smirked. The judge sighed. The bailiff barely looked up, but Jasmine saw what they refused to see. A system that had already made up its mind. She stood up, voice steady, cited case law, challenged procedure, pointed out missing evidence, and won. Not because the court wanted her to, but because she refused to let them forget that justice still mattered. That's how it began. Day after day, courtroom after courtroom, Jasmine Crockett fought. Not for prestige, not for headlines, but for the people most lawyers avoided, the wrongly accused, the voiceless, the ones the system had quietly decided were disposable. She'd walk into court with worn heels and binders overflowing with notes. She'd leave knowing she just bought someone another shot at freedom. But it wasn't easy. There were nights she cried in her car, mornings she doubted everything. Judges who cut her off mid-sentence. Opposing counsel who called her sweetheart. She learned to mask rage with precision, to turn disrespect into fuel. And when she began speaking out, not just in court, but on the airwaves, the media didn't quite know what to do with her. Too bold, too direct, too... Black local stations cropped her quotes. Editorials called her combative. She was told she'd go further if she softened her tone. But Crockett wasn't here to be palatable. She was here to be heard, and people listened. From courtroom victories to viral clips of her dismantling political talking points, she began rising. Not through party favors or backroom deals, but through proof. Proof that justice doesn't have to whisper. Proof that brilliance doesn't always come in a tailored package. Proof that a woman who came from nothing could hold her own against anyone. When the Texas legislature tried to silence her, she made more noise. When far-right pundits came for her, she came back with facts and fire. And when she ran for Congress, people said she wouldn't make it. Too outspoken, too risky. But she won. Because people were tired of being spoken down to. They wanted someone who didn't just look like them, but fought like them. Someone who wasn't afraid to name the injustice. Someone who brought the courtroom into Congress and made the mic a weapon for truth. She took her oath not as a careerist climbing a ladder, but as a defender bringing the same fight she started with. Jasmine Crockett didn't pivot to politics. She transformed it because every time she's spoken, every time she stood, it hasn't just been for herself. It's been for the kid on trial with no one else in their corner, for the girl who gets told to calm down, for the voter who wonders if anyone in Washington remembers their name. That's the thing about her. She doesn't need to pretend. She doesn't need to perform. She shows up as herself. And that's exactly what makes her unstoppable. So when Bill Clinton tried to reduce all that to a snide remark about her legal career, he wasn't just wrong. He was picking a fight with someone who never backs down. It was billed as a discussion, a generational dialogue between icons and upstarts. The stage was dressed in neutral blues, flags tucked behind leather chairs. The moderator's voice low and balanced. Cameras framed it like a meeting of minds. But anyone paying attention knew better. This wasn't a conversation. It was a power play. Bill Clinton sat back in his chair like it was a throne. Legs crossed, fingertips steepled, eyes scanning. The room like he already knew the outcome. Jasmine Crockett sat upright, still, poised. The contrast was stark. He wore his confidence like a tailored suit. She wore hers like armor. The question came casually from the moderator. Where do you both see the law's role in balancing public safety and civil liberties in today's climate? Clinton answered first. "Oh, I think it's important we not reinvent the wheel every generation," he began, voice smooth. "We spent decades building a system that works, when used responsibly." Then a glance toward Jasmine, just enough to suggest what was coming. "Now I understand the passion," he said, "and I respect it. But we can't pretend slogans and social media threads replace courtroom experience." A few heads in the audience nodded. Some murmurs. Jasmine remained still. Clinton pressed on. "You see, real reform isn't loud. It's deliberate. It's strategic. And frankly, I worry that some of our newer voices, however well-intentioned, are more interested in attention than outcomes." Another ripple. A laugh here. A raised brow there. Crockett didn't blink. Clinton uncrossed his legs, leaned forward. Now he was getting comfortable. "I mean, when I was Attorney General of Arkansas, there it was. The resume drop. We faced real problems. And we didn't solve them by shouting at cameras or blaming the system. We rolled up our sleeves. We worked within the institutions." He looked at her directly now. "That's the difference between having experience and just having opinions." Gasps, half hidden. One moderator subtly looked to the control booth. Crockett's expression didn't change. She didn't flinch. She let it sit, because she knew what he was doing, baiting her, framing her as emotional, impulsive, unqualified, hoping she'd snap, but she wouldn't. She knew how this worked, how black women get branded the moment they raise their voice, how condescension cloaked in civility is still an attack. So she waited, let the silence thicken. Let the audience wonder. Clinton adjusted his tie, cleared his throat, smiled that patented politician's smile, and for a moment it looked like he'd won the exchange, that his seasoned delivery had, once again, stolen the room. But the room hadn't shifted to him. It had frozen because Jasmine was still watching, still unmoved, still building something beneath the surface. And then, with one breath, Jasmine took control of the room. Jasmine Crockett didn't move for a moment. The air was heavy, electric. Even the moderator looked frozen, unsure whether to intervene or wait for whatever was about to happen. Then she leaned in. Just a little. Not aggressive. Not performative. Intentional. "I heard a lot of words," she said, her voice calm, steady. "But what I didn't hear was accountability." A few heads turned. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. "Mr. President," she said, eyes locked on Clinton, "you mentioned your time as Attorney General. You mentioned your decades of experience. You even brought up your sleeves, rolled up, working within the system." She let the pause hang, perfectly placed. "I've worked in that system too." Now the tone shifted. Slightly steelier. "But the difference between us?" She tapped the table once. "You designed the system that punished the poor for being poor. I defended the people who suffered because of it." Murmurs. A sharp intake of breath. One camera operator audibly shifted position. Clinton sat back, lips tightening. Jasmine pressed forward. "When I walked into my first courtroom, there wasn't a legacy or a machine or a war chest behind me. Just a case file and a client who couldn't afford the system you helped build." Another pause. Perfect pacing. "I didn't have the luxury of theory. I had facts. I had lives on the line. I had prosecutors pushing for decades-long sentences over petty theft." Clinton shifted, crossed his legs again. "And while we're on the subject of shouting," she continued, "let's talk about who gets called passionate and who gets called angry. Because every time I raise my voice to defend my community, I'm told I lack decorum. But when you passed a crime bill that devastated black families for a generation, it was called leadership." A gasp. Louder now. One clap from the back. Quickly silenced, but not forgotten. Jasmine turned slightly, facing the audience now. Respect. isn't measured in years held in office. It's measured in whether you leave the people better than you found them. And with all due respect, sir, a lot of us are still trying to clean up after your legacy." Clinton opened his mouth. Closed it. She wasn't finished. "You say I don't understand the law? I lived it. I practiced it. I wielded it like a shield for those who had nothing else. And let's be clear, knowing policy doesn't mean reciting a playbook from 1996. It means understanding the lives behind the numbers. It means knowing that one missed paycheck can mean jail, that one bad law can mean a lifetime lost." Silence. Thick. Complete. "No one handed me power," she added. "I earned it. Not by charming donors or shaking hands at galas, but by sitting in holding cells listening to stories this system was never built to hear. A beat. You can critique my tone. You can dismiss my credentials. But what you will not do is rewrite history in front of people still living with its consequences." There it was. The clapback. The truth. Delivered not with rage, but with clarity. Sharp enough to cut glass. She leaned back, unshaken. The moderator blinked, searched for words. Clinton adjusted his cuffs again but didn't speak. The room was still. And then, soft at first, someone clapped, then another. Then it rolled. A low thunder of hands finding rhythm. Not a standing ovation, not yet, but close, because something had shifted. It wasn't just a moment. It was a reckoning. Jasmine Crockett hadn't embarrassed Bill Clinton. She had reminded the room who the Democratic Party was supposed to fight for. And Clinton, for all his experience, suddenly looked dated. She had held up a mirror, and the reflection wasn't flattering. For a man used to owning every room he entered, it was a rare thing. Silence. He forced a smile, nodded politely, tried to reclaim his footing. But the ground had moved, and the audience knew it. Because in 7 minutes, Jasmine Crockett had done something no headline, no analyst, no protest had ever quite accomplished. She made America's most iconic political tactician look small. But the real explosion wasn't in that room. It was on millions of screens across the country within hours. It took less than an hour. Clips of Jasmine Crockett's takedown hit Twitter before the stage lights had even cooled. The first post came from a journalist in the room. Jasmine Crockett just served Bill Clinton a reality check he won't forget. Crockett clapped back. By midnight, it was everywhere. Edited videos cut the moment to its core. Clinton's smirk dissolving, Crockett's voice slicing through silence, the crowd's stunned reaction. One TikTok looped her line, "You helped build the system. I defended the people trapped in it," over a beat drop, then flashed images of her courtroom wins, protest footage, and the words, "This is what leadership looks like. Sire." It hit 1 million views before dawn. On Instagram, side-by-side comparison posts bloomed. Clinton in his prime next to Crockett standing in Congress, holding her ground with fire in her eyes. The caption, "One passed the crime bill. One fights. It's damage. Know the difference." Crockett clapback trended globally. Even late-night hosts got in on it. Trevor Noah. She didn't just read him. She wrote the whole closing argument. Hassan Minhaj. That wasn't a debate. That was cross-examination. The memes were relentless. Clinton's face mid-blink. Captions like, "When you realize experience doesn't protect you from facts." Jasmine brought receipts, and a whole subpoena. Progressive figures weighed in with thunderous support. AOC. More of this. Less of the old playbook. "Thank you, Jasmine, for us." Ayanna Pressley. Truth to power. With poise. With purpose. Even figures outside politics joined in. Kerry Washington tweeted a clip with, "This woman did that." And in the background, the Clinton camp stayed silent. No statement. No clarification. Just stillness. which said everything because what could they say? That it was out of context? The full clip was worse. That she misunderstood him? She quoted him verbatim. The internet had no patience for spin. This wasn't just a trending moment. It was a shift. Cable anchors debated the implications. Is this the symbolic handoff? Are Democrats finally shedding the Clinton-era baggage? Are we witnessing the party's future? In real time? Commentators split down familiar lines. Establishment voices downplayed it. Let's not forget the former president's decades of service. But they sounded tired. Meanwhile, the rest of the world couldn't look away. YouTubers made breakdowns. Podcasts analyzed every sentence. Gen Z creators turned Crockett's lines into soundtracks for everything from law school inspiration to morning routines. A viral tweet read, "Girl just lawyered up on a president." It had 500,000 likes in 24 hours, and then came the ripple effect. Crockett's campaign donations spiked. Emails poured in from young attorneys, single moms, public defenders, teachers, students. One read, "I've never seen someone like me speak truth like that on that kind of stage. Thank you for not holding back." But not all the messages were warm. Fox News fired back, predictably. Tucker's replacement ranted about disrespecting tradition. Op-eds warned that radicals were hijacking the party. But the backlash didn't land because it wasn't about disrespect. It was about truth. And Crockett hadn't shouted. She hadn't stormed. She had stood. Calm. Focused. Impeccably prepared. And that made it undeniable, even for her. She scrolled that night in bed. Headlines, messages, clips. It didn't feel real. She'd spoken her truth 1,000 times before, but never had it echoed like this. And just when she thought the noise might settle, the phone rang. A name she hadn't seen in years lit up the screen, because even Crockett herself didn't expect what happened next. The next morning, Jasmine Crockett woke up to a storm she didn't create, but one she was built to weather. Her team drafted statements. Reporters called non-stop. Requests flooded in from networks, op-eds, panel shows. Everyone wanted to hear her version, but she didn't rush to speak. She waited, watched, let the moment breathe. And when she did speak, it wasn't to gloat. It wasn't to claim victory. It was to remind the country what the moment was really about. "I didn't speak to embarrass anyone," she said, sitting before a row of microphones. "I spoke because I've spent my life watching people like me, people who work twice as hard for half the recognition, be told they're not enough, not smart enough, not experienced enough, not polished enough." She looked directly into the lens. "I've heard it my whole life, that if I wanted to be taken seriously, I had to shrink myself, water it down, play nice, smile more, let people finish their sentences when they're wrong." She smiled now, not polite but sure. That's not leadership. That's survival. And we didn't come this far just to survive. The room was quiet. She continued, "When President Clinton questioned my qualifications, he didn't just question me. He echoed every dismissive voice I've ever had to push through. And every voice you've had to push through, too." She paused. Let it sink. This wasn't about ego. This was about who gets to speak, who gets to lead, and who gets to decide what leadership even looks like. The clip went viral again. Not for drama, but for its clarity, its weight, because Jasmine wasn't just clapping back anymore. She was lifting people up. In a follow-up interview, she said, "It even plainer. You don't need a legacy name to make a difference. You don't need to be invited. You don't need to beg to belong. If you've lived it, if you've fought through it, you already carry the authority." She called it service over status. And it resonated, not just with progressives, not just with activists, but with anyone who's ever walked into a room and been told, directly or silently, that they weren't enough. Jasmine Crockett became more than a politician that week. She became a symbol, not because she won an argument, but because she reframed the attack, turned it into a rallying cry, a message etched into comment sections, classrooms, and campaign slogans. Your fight, your knowledge, your truth, that's your power. And whether she meant to or not, she reminded the country of something it had forgotten in all the noise and punditry. Dignity doesn't shout. It stands. Justice doesn't always wear a suit. Sometimes it wears worn heels and carries a binder full of case notes. And leadership isn't about who speaks the most. It's about who speaks when it matters most. Clinton's words faded into the background. Crockett's echoed. And as the week rolled on, she didn't bask in it. She got back to work, because that's what real leaders do. Bill Clinton tried to dismiss Jasmine Crockett with a smirk. He didn't just miscalculate. He misunderstood what this moment was, because what happened on that stage wasn't just a political clapback. It was a generational reckoning, a line in the sand, a reminder that the era of gatekeeping, condescension, and polished dismissals is ending, and the era of unapologetic, grounded, people-powered truth is here. Jasmine Crockett didn't need to shout. She didn't need to posture. She just needed to speak. And in doing so, she gave a voice to everyone who's ever been doubted, talked over, or told to wait their turn. That's why this moment matters, because it wasn't just about a president being humbled. It was about power being redefined. So if you believe in voices like Jasmine's, if you believe in the courage to speak truth, not from comfort, but from experience, then don't let this moment fade. Subscribe to this channel, because this isn't the last time dignity is going to rise up and speak. Share this video with someone who's been underestimated, someone who needs to know their voice does belong at the table. And remember, you don't have to come from power to speak with it. You just have to be ready. Jasmine Crockett was, and the world heard her loud and clear.